Okay, so let everybody else join as they. I think they'll be joining another 2-3 minutes, but we can kickstart. So, guys, extremely delighted to have Jai today, with whom I had the fortune of working together at Oyo. So, Jai was handling within Oyo the products that was being used by hotel managers. There was a tab which they um used to manage all the bookings. So essentially, the in the entire booking hotel management system, entire hotel booking system, he was responsible for that. After Oyo, he moved to Dubai, UAE, Sheikhon ke paas, and now he is taking care of the driver app for Careem. So Careem is the Uber for UAE, effectively. Okay. So Monday ko we had a session with this guy called Gaurav. He is the principal product manager at Grab. So I think I'm getting all the Uber's competitors one by one.
Yeah, and finally one day, like you'll get somebody from Uber as well.
I'm sure. uh, Jamin,
Genuine say,
noise not clear or voice not clear? Jamin, just try like switching on and switching off. Perhaps that will work because it's clear for me and clear for Prashant as well. So it might be a problem at your end. Okay. Um, so Jay is with us for today for about an hour. Um, and he has some very interesting insights or practices that they have been following since almost year and a half now, which I got very intrigued about, and I thought this is perfect for our students, for all of you. He will talk about how they don't use PRDs at all. It's a practice that they have stopped using. Okay, they do something else, which is very intriguing, very interesting. Number two, he's also going to talk about how they have used Google Sprints to their benefit, and something that is not very commonly available. Guys, don't worry, I'm still there. uh, it's Gurgaon, so electricity will keep going and off, on and off. Um, so he's going to also talk about how they have used Google Sprints very effectively in their organization. And then there are a couple of two more, and there are a couple of more points which he will be covering, which I'll let him cover from here. That's it from my side, guys. Over to you, Jay.
So, hello everyone. It's a really honor that Talvinder invited me to this talk. So I'm really excited about speaking about product management. I pretty much transitioned into this role with Oyo only post my post graduation, and back then I was a developer and I transitioned into this role. And it was so one of the interesting learnings over the last 2 years, and specifically over the last 1 year, is basically that when you're writing when you're doing product management, nothing is an assumption. So can you guys can you see the screen, Palvinder?
Yeah, we can see the screen.
Okay, so one of the interesting things that I learned about when I transitioned into product management was when I was writing my first product requirement document, and I pretty much wrote like a good essay and everything. Something was here. But the only problem was that when I gave it to the development team, they were like, "It looks pretty good, but I don't know what to do about it." And that was first learning. And then I got into like, okay, how to do about it and what to do about it. So broke it. So we broke it down into like a very actionable set of items. And even after doing that for like a couple of times, the biggest learning was that don't assume anything. Like even the slightest of the detail needs to be written down. Even like if you have to write down like a scroll on a page, everything needs to be documented. So I'll talk about like how do we do that at Careem. Like we don't really have a structure of writing a long product requirement document in a Google document or a Confluence document, because the experience with them is like people don't end up reading all of them in the detail that's required. So what we do is basically we split that into two specific audiences. So we have like one of the audiences basically the business, which is your entire company and your entire team who is actually like working with you around it. And the second is basically the technology team around it. So basically with the business document, what we do is like we create a comprehensive presentation or a document where you actually have the problem statement, the KPIs, the roadmap, the plan of action. You basically present it across the organization as it is. So assume this to be a document like if you're going for a startup pitch, this is one of those. This is that kind of a detailed kind of a document that you would need, where you say like, okay, this is the problem statement, this is the opportunity, this is the size of the problem. If I do this, this is going to be solved. This is the big amount of benefit that we get out of it. So, for example, like when I joined in the company at that point of time, basically like in any kind of a ride-hailing industry, like handing out bonus or an incentive to the drivers or captains, as we call them over here, is one of the most key things that one of the key ways of getting more supply on board. And when I joined in the company, I found that most of the drivers used to dispute about their specific like whether they received the bonus or did not receive the bonus, and the way the screens were presented to them, it was pretty much like ununderstandable. So what we did was like we picked up that problem statement, we created an entire presentation around it, we picked up those KPIs, we developed a prototype around it we brainstormed, developed a prototype, walked it through the captains and across 3 to 4 different markets around. And then we finally got a go ahead, like, okay, this seems to be working. And so that was the first step of solving any business problem that we pick up over here. And then comes the second part of solving the problem, like the second part of basically the implementation, the plan of action, where you actually like my learning was like, we don't assume anything, we just write it down to the last detail and assume that you'll never be able to meet your team ever. Like for in my case, like my team works out of 3 different countries. Like my team sits out of Dubai, my team sits out of Karachi, and also Berlin. So 3 different time zones, and you hardly get to speak to them like more than once a day or something, because you can't be on the call the entire day. So we had to we actually write it down to that detail, like every button click is explained, everything is explained. And what we do is we break down everything into an actionable story, a Jira story, and that every story has an acceptance criteria around it. And so that's how we try to do product at Careem, like in terms of understanding the goal basically starts at what's the business problem, how do we measure that that's a business problem, and how do we break it down into a roadmap to solve that problem. So that's how we start doing the problem solving at Careem. And I'm pretty sure like some of you guys I'm pretty sure some of you guys must be transitioning into a product management role, or probably might have some kind of experience into a product management, some bit of detail. But this is the first learning that I ever had into product management, and that's something, one of the biggest learnings that I can actually correlate with, and I would impart you guys with. Like this is something that we all need to understand in terms of product management. In case you have any questions, like you can post them on the chat. Like let's keep the session to be more interactive, because in such sessions, like it's the more we interact, the more is going to be, the more questions that come out is actually going to create a lot more detail into the section.
So I think the first question is from me, Jai. Will it be possible for you to show or give an example of the user stories that you're talking about, or the sprint stories that you're talking about, to give the students an idea about what is the detail that you're talking about here?
So, for example, like the other day, what I was working was like, so the first project that we did was around the reducing the contact rate of all the of bonus and guarantees. Like once we understood like what's happening in the market, like to the specific detail, like if there is a dispute button on the screen, what should be the color of that dispute button? What should be the interaction of that dispute button? And so, for example, like once you click on the dispute button, like what should happen for the user? Like
Sure.
and given a scenario like, okay, you have an internet connection. If you click on a dispute button, a next set of screens should open up, and what should the user see? Like if he comes from a bonus screen, what are the dispositions that should be appearing for him? If there is no internet, what kind of error messages should be appearing for the user? If he's actually submitted a dispute around it, what should be appearing to him? even to the last bit of detail that you can probably imagine around is basically like once you scroll up, like in most of the mobile devices that you can imagine, like once you scroll up, the header gets fixed
Right.
and you can scroll up content. So even that to a bit of detail that needs to be classified in a story. Like if I'm scrolling up on the window, the header should get fixed automatically, and the content should keep scrolling up through overflow around it. So this is basically the last mile of detail that we cover once we are writing the problem state, the PRDs, or basically the sprint stories. And one of the most important things that we do over here is we basically follow the sprint method of the agile method of implementation. So which basically requires us to sit with the team like every week for like at least couple of hours where we go through all the stories, where we discuss all the stories with the team, where we have like we open up each. So the first step is basically we walk the team through the entire business presentation that we prepared and get them on board with the idea that this is the problem that we are trying to solve, and this is what we are thinking of solutions, and this is what we want to do. Once we are done with that, we basically break that down with the engineering team for the entire, or with the UX team. Basically, we break them down into
So
smaller
sorry, I'm
stories.
interrupting here. So what's the sprint cycle like there?
So for us, basically, like we do a like a standard 2 week sprint, and in terms of the 2 week sprint, basically, like what it basically starts even a week ahead of the 2 week thing, like where uh, so suppose it's today is 1st of June, and from first of June, I'll start preparing for the sprint that starts from 15th of June.
Sure. So you are at
Uh,
least one sprint early.
Yes, yes. So I'm at least one sprint early. I'll prepare all the stories beforehand. We discuss all those stories with the UX team, with the engineering lead, where we break them down into smaller details, where we identify what should be the acceptance criteria for every story, because some of the stories basically require acceptance criteria from the UX side, but in some of the cases the acceptance criteria is required from the engineering side, and how do we put them in one order. And this is basically the first 5 days of this one, and the second week is basically when we sit with the entire engineering team. We go each story by story, and the story is discussed in the entire room. It's basically like it's put on the board where the entire team discusses the
Okay.
story, and then there is the sizing of the story comes up, and that's where like most of the challenges are identified or understood around. This basically
And
like called a planning or a grooming kind of a session, where like basically a grooming session, and sometimes if you don't have time, you basically club the planning and grooming together.
correct. And the sizing or the estimation, what do you follow? You follow story points or some fancy something else?
No, we follow the story points, and so one of the important things while working with the story points is story points are basically not an estimate of the time required to complete the story. It is basically like how complex is the story.
Correct.
So, for example, like Talvinder, like imagine running a marathon. So if you have like a star performer, he might run the marathon in like 3 hours or 3.5 hours. But for you and I, probably will be taking like 6 to 10 hours to run the same marathon. So
Exactly.
it's so basically the sprints are basically so the estimates are not a estimation of the time required. It's basically required how many what's
Complexity.
the complex. So a marathon will always be a marathon, no matter who runs it.
Got it. And just to talk about complexity versus why introduce complexity in between. Just to give you just to give an insight to all the students. So you introduce complexity instead of number of hours is like Jay said, different people will cope with different problems differently. Okay, both the developers might be amazing developers, but one is great at PHP, one is great at JavaScript. To put it very simply, now it so happens that the PHP guy has to implement something in JavaScript, and the other guy has to implement something in the other bit, which becomes very complicated for both of them. Now it becomes a research plus implementation job for them, and that's why it's very important to instead of saying that do this in 8 hours, he can actually say that yeah, this is a complexity number 24 for me. So according to the past estimates, I think this is going to take me at least 8 hours to 16 hours to do this, right? And it becomes much more reliable a metric than the number of hours metric. uh,
Exactly.
right? And I think there was a question by Srijit. How do you manage
Yep.
brainstorming and feedback session at Careem with the distributor team? What
Yeah.
tools do you
So
use? How do you manage it?
so basically, like for smaller things, what we try to do is we try to do like video conferencing and get and do all the brainstorming or via video conferences. For like bigger issues, like bigger problems, what we try to do is we try to fly down the team from one of the centers to the base camp. So we call basically our office, the bike office, as base camp.
Okay,
And once everybody's on the base camp, like we get into a room like for like 2 to 5 days, and we just brainstorm around it. I'll be covering that aspect in the Google design sprint. So I just went into a design sprint this week itself, and I
sure.
can act. It's even more fresh now.
Okay,
I
got
think
it.
there is one question
Yeah,
around like, can you give an example of roadmap with respect to the business document?
yes.
So basically, like imagine this, like uh, in terms of Careem or any kind of a ride-hailing business, what you would want is like you have dynamic demand coming from every part of the city and every hour of the day. But over a period of time, you do recognize like I mean that one problem. If you like, there is one thing that you would all if you solve like if you get the uh, like if you get the right driver at the right place at the right time, the number of the demand that you'll be able to fulfill is close to 100%. If in ideal world, like you'll be able, if you get all the drivers at the right time at the right place, you'll always be able to fulfill 100% of the demand. But so that becomes like an overarching problem statement that you are looking for. Like that becomes a vision that you have trying to solve for. And for that specific vision, you break them down into smaller problem statements. Like, okay, I'll try to get all my. So these are like specific times in the day where I get higher amount of demand from certain parts of the city. So I'll try to position all my supply or specific amount of supply in that part of the city. So that becomes a very specific problem statement. But and then it becomes like in order to implement that problem statement, like you could probably say like you break it down into, oh, okay, this is going to be the first version. I'll probably like send a message to all my drivers in the city around a day in advance or a specific time in the day that be in this region and try to measure to cater all the demand. And after some point of time, like you measure the impact out of it, and then there could be a second level of product that will be built around to solve that problem, and the third version of the product. So basically, you break them down into like smaller chunks, and everything becomes into a roadmap. So this becomes like the first level of tactical roadmap of how do you implement or solve for that vision. And the second is once things go into development, then you have like a week over week vision chart where week over week planner chart where basically you say like okay, this particular feature or this particular product is in this phase of the journey, and this is when it's going to go out, and how this is how I'm going to test it, this is how I'm going to market it. Then that becomes a very detailed kind of roadmap. Does this answer the question?
I think there's a second part to it, which is how do you decide which set of user stories can be launched for measuring the KPI? थोड़ा सा vague question है, but I think and very difficult to actually answer. But
Yeah, I think
give it a shot.
it's a fair question. I think this comes with an experience. So basically,
Yeah,
it's like the uh, I cannot launch a app without having without with अगर वो launch क्या कहते हैं बेसिकली अगर आप कोई फीचर ले रहे हो, अगर उसके बेसिक कंपोनेंट्स उठा के आप कंप्लीट करके लॉन्च कर सकते हो, इट बिकम्स अ बेसिक प्रोडक्ट दैट द पीपल आर एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड. Then it becomes like you can launch it, but otherwise you can't. Imagine like a एयरप्लेन, अगर उसमें क्या कहते हैं तीन पहिए नहीं होंगे तो प्लेन टेक ऑफ ही नहीं कर पाएगा, तो आप वो प्लेन मार्क उसमें लॉन्च नहीं कर सकते हो क्या कहते हैं के ऊपर, या
sure.
उसमें बेसिक नंबर पैरामीटर्स रिक्वायर्ड होंगे बिफोर इट कैन फ्लाई ऑफ, तो एटलीस्ट वो आपको देखना पड़ता है. एंड दिस इज समथिंग दैट once you do it, you basically get experience around it.
Correct. Basically, you look at which user stories are potentially complete, complete to the degree where you can get some actionable outcome out of it, right? So, for instance, let's say you have done, let me give an extreme example. Let's say you have figured out the best search engine or whatever, and सब कुछ अपनी जगह पे है, right? But you have not instrumented anything. You have not created any kind of events or anything to actually start tracking the tracking or measuring the outcome, that how many zero searches are happening, how many searches are accurate, how many times does a person have to search before he actually clicks on any product, right? A lot of these things. You have not instrumented that yet. Will you call it a complete product? I would say no or yes, depending on whether this is the first time you're launching it, or this is a Series A company or a Series B company who is, who is trying to improve its checkout flow, right? In the second case, the user story itself is not complete because you cannot measure anything, right? And so you'll have to wait for those acceptance criteria. You will have to wait for those things to be complete before you launch the user story. There was one more question,
So
but I think that is okay. That has been answered.
I think we covered that question.
Right.
And one of the other things that as a product manager that you have to continue doing is basically keep speaking to your customer.
Right.
So your customer, like in my case, the captains are a customer, and in the customer side, like the riders are the customer. So keep speaking to the customer, and because if you don't speak to the customer, if you get distant from the customer, then you'll not be able to solve their problems. If you're not able to solve their problems, your product will never fly. I mean, you'll be solving a problem, but for not for this specific customer. So keep speaking, keep interacting with them as often as possible.
Right. Right. I mean, that should come as a second nature. मतलब उसमें effort माना बंद हो जाना चाहिए. It should become a second nature that
Exactly.
you are practically talking to every day. Because your problem है, you at least have maybe 5 or 10 or 20 people who you can at least give a call and just do a quick inquiry if you potentially can.
Exactly. So like the way I do it is basically like for like we are a marketplace business, so there are like many WhatsApp groups, so not WhatsApp groups or basically like Facebook groups that are created around it. And I have just joined like 10-15 Facebook groups, and I constantly hear the chatter around over there. Like anything that we launch, I just hear the chatter within like 6 hours itself. So that's a very good way to keep in touch with the customers, even if you're not able to go out and actively speak to them on the street.
Right.
But this gives a good amount of insight into the business.
Makes sense. There's a new question that
At,
how do you handle experimentation? How do you
so I'm assuming like when you say experimentation, it's mostly about the fact that how do we launch features in a A/B mode, or basically test different kind of behaviors from the captains and everything. I'm assuming that to be the question. And so basically, we have tools around it. We use Mix Panel for A/B testing over here,
okay?
and we have some internal tools as well that we have built around over here, where we like randomly choose a set of user IDs or the captain IDs and just launch the feature specifically for them. And then we continue to monitor it for like 2 to 3 weeks. Generally in our business, it's like 1 week takes like for adoption of the feature with a smaller feature, and 2 weeks with a larger feature. That's when we see a spike or a surge in all the contact rate or anything kind of it that's visible to the that for all features that are visible to the user. And then for the next 2 weeks, we basically like we monitor what's the difference between the group A or the group B. And once we are done with the experiment, we basically reach out to all the users. We have developed an in-house method of sending out surveys, automated surveys to these two users, where we get their input, like where we as product managers set up a questionnaire, get it translated from different resources in the company, and get their feedback, first-hand feedback from the customer itself, or in our case, basically the captains.
Got it. So how often, and I think this is something which I had to spend some time in the early days of the course to explain, that in real companies, especially nowadays, the chances of you sitting with your team is low, is only decreasing, right?
Yes.
Even if you're co-located, there's a high chance that you are actually on field, or you are in
Yeah.
some other office trying to figure out. For example, we used to be in Delhi, Gurgaon, but a lot of times we used to
Mm.
go to actually Bombay or some other place to inquire or to find out some on-field knowledge, right? So the importance of being remote uh, is something that everybody has to understand really well. And what does it leads to? For example, you said, right, you kind of idiot proof everything, right? You because the instances of communication. Okay, am I not audible? Jay, can you hear me? Others, can you hear me? Okay, Jay, you are the only one. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So I'm saying that there's something which I had to explain this and help people understand or realize that remote work is only going to increase from here on out. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
even if you're co-located, the chances of you interacting with developers day in day out is only going to decrease and decrease. I mean, there's going to be something, but it's not going to be like you can. Could be problem why so you can just walk up to the table and explain it, right?
yep, yep,
So
yep.
one you need to so one to avoid this, one you need to make sure that your PRD or the document or whatever artifact that you're producing has to be idiot proof, has to speak for itself. That is one.
Exactly.
The second thing, you have to make sure that it is as and this doesn't mean that it is all verbose, that सब कुछ लिख दिया है, कहानी रामायण लिख दी है, सबको समझ में आ जाएगा. The whatever artifact you have produced, it should be easy to parse, it should be easy to decipher. That's, I think, the most important thing. To that end, whether you're using mockups or you're using activity diagrams, you're using state machine diagrams, or you're additionally writing your stories, that's all your decision. What tools you use, what instruments you use to eventually do this, I think it's your call. But this is something that you need to develop a skill for, right? I think. What do you think, Jay? I think मैंने कम किया फिर भी, I think, but you have done it a little more.
I think what you are saying is pretty much the crux of it. Like whatever works for you. Like as I was saying, like don't assume anything. Just write it down. Like as if you'll never be able to speak to your
Exactly.
developer any. वो last time आप it's just imagine कि आप केवल document दे रहे हो जो इसमें लिख के दे रहे हो वही बाहर निकल के आएगा.
Right.
And you have to create a balance. Like if you write too much, the developer is not going to read it. If you write too less, the so details miss only. So you have to figure out the right balance. And for that specific purpose, what I do is basically like this is a habit that I picked up from Talvinder only. I started using Confluence, and Confluence basically helps you like write down all the features very easily, transform them into stories and everything. And the second thing that I started using was like Boss, like for mockups. If I'm not able to explain anything, I'll just draw a diagram around on Balsamic. It's a fairly straightforward tool. And the third was basically the flow diagrams, like how would the data flow, what would the user see, and all of those things. And typically, like the story of the user needs to be consistent. Like the entire user story needs to be consistent. Like okay, imagine the user ये करने आएगा, if he does this, तो ये होगा. User ये करने
Right.
जाएगा, तो फिर ये होगा. You have to write down all the scenarios, think through all the scenarios. And one thing that you should always do, you should always involve your team as well. Like even if it's like co-located or any of that, you need to involve the team because eventually implement उनको करना है, so they need to be involved. And you as a person will not be able to think all the scenarios that are possible in the world. So don't be that Superman. Include your team in that this thought process.
Absolutely. And I think something which I like to call, I've not used this word too often though, God view. A God view create karo, which if anybody sees it, he knows कि, okay, this is what we are building. It's a very 30,000 feet view of your entire product, all the potential, use cases, all the flows that are diverging, that are converging, the edge cases. You're covering almost all of that in a nice long large diagram. So when the developer is confused, he knows कि अच्छा मैं यहाँ पर हूँ, मुझे अभी ये भी handle करना बचा हुआ है. He knows it really, really well. And same goes with designers. Designers also miss out because they do not have a full blown view that, okay, these are the use cases, these are the edge cases which I have to cover, and they miss out or they forget, right? For example, and some of these things are very for example, in design, let's say you are a very large app, okay, so you have to also take care of accessibility, okay, so you have to take care of color blindness, for instance, or similar issues, vision issues or things like this, in which case you have to actually tell the designer that, hey, this is the kind of users that we have, so you cannot use these kind of colors, or you have to use uh, you know uh, I don't know if the technical term is right, but color blindness friendly colors, I don't know if that is the right term for it, but effectively you have to explain this to the people that, hey, now in the next sprint we want to make it much more accessible for our users, and for that reason we want to do this, right? तो यहाँ तक
For
जाना पड़
example,
सकता है.
Amazon की website पे making something accessible would be such a difficult job. But then,
Right.
even then, if you want to highlight your attention to a specific tile or specific thing, how they're able to do it.
Correct. Awesome. So, guys, if you do not have any more questions, I think there's one more question which I would like to ask Jay, and I think that will be very useful for a lot of you. So, Jay was a developer, okay,
Yep.
and then he transitioned to product management. He did his MBA. He did the cardinal sin. Uh, he did his MBA, and then he transitioned to product management. Um, I think there are multiple questions in line. One, what was the experience all about from developer to product management? And after doing an MBA, you had plenty of options, right? I think you did it from IMC, IMB. I'm not sure which one you do.
No, I did it from Indian School of Business, and then I
ISB.
went to
Sorry.
the exchange.
Right. So he did it from ISB, and ISB ke baad there are so many other options. Why did you pick product management? Especially when you're a developer, why did you pick product management? What was the experience like, and what is your advice for the people who are now transitioning into product management? Quite a few are have some development का flavor के कोई designers हैं यहाँ पे, कुछ business के folks हैं, right? So what is your advice
So,
and what is your journey like?
so in order to answer that question, I'll have to wind back a little bit. So, 2009 when I graduated. At that point of time, I graduated, and there was a bit of recession around the country and all of that stuff. So at that point of time, I started my first company within college alum. And at that point of time, basically, you are two people in the company, you're doing everything. So I always like technology, always like writing code, developing systems around it and everything. And at that point of time, I was doing business as well, like because I was reaching out to the customers, understanding the customer requirement, implementing him. तो उस टाइम फॉर्मल कोई प्रोडक्ट मैनेजमेंट नहीं होता था हमारे हम दो लोगों के बीच में. We used to be the product manager, we used to be the technology guy, we used to be like everything. So after that, that company didn't work out. I worked there for like 3.5 years, and then I moved into different companies into technology roles. तो मेरे को एक प्रॉब्लम सबसे ज्यादा जो होता था उन सब कंपनीज में ये होता था कि आई वाज जस्ट अ टेक गाय. मेरे को कोई आके बता देता था कोड लिख दूंगा, ये हो जाएगा. तो आई वाज नॉट वेरी हैप्पी अबाउट इट. सो आई थॉट कि लेट्स एंड आई स्टार्टेड रिसर्चिंग अराउंड कि I am a guy who likes technology. I am a guy who understands business. Is there something that can sit in between that? So that's where I went for my MBA, like, thinking about this. I need to learn more about business. I'm a good tech guy, but I need to learn more about business and everything. So from there on, understood about more about product management and how what product management is about, and that's where I hit the sweet spot. So I was sitting between the customer, business, and technology, and trying to understand the 30,000 view, the roadmap, and the vision, and the problem statement, and everything, and transforming that then into solutions via technology. So that's where my expertise and everything kicked into place. So that's how I transitioned into a product management career.
So that gave you
But
that gave you the bulb, right? That gave you the proverbial bulb that yeah, this is the sweet spot. I can crack it.
yep,
So how was the
yes.
transition like? कितने तैयारी करनी पड़ी after your MBA or during your MBA?
So एमबीए में एक्चुअली एक तो ट्रांजिशन एक अच्छा हो जाता है लाइक वंस यूर वर्किंग एज एन इंजीनियर या
Yeah,
टेक्नोलॉजी गाय. तो एक चीज आपके थोड़ा सा ब्लाइंड स्पॉट क्रिएट कर लेते हो कि यू आर नॉट थिंकिंग इन टू मच इन टर्म्स ऑफ द बिजनेस और द कस्टमर. यू इज थिंकिंग ऑफ कि ये नई टेक्नोलॉजी आई है,
right, हाँ.
इसको मेरे को इम्प्लीमेंट करना है. बट प्रोडक्ट मैनेजमेंट में यू बेसिकली से ठीक है ये चीज आ तो गई है लेकिन आप इम्प्लीमेंट करेंगे तो व्हाट प्रॉब्लम इज इट गोइंग टू सॉल्व? इज इट गोइंग टू
Exactly.
इम्प्रूव अ कस्टमर एक्सपीरियंस? इज इट गोइंग टू गेट द राइट कैप्टन एट द राइट प्लेस? इज इट गोइंग टू इम्प्रूव एनीथिंग? फॉर एग्जाम्पल लाइक अमेजोन में, Amazon is an e-commerce company, and two things if they do efficiently, they're always going to create value, like getting the price of the product cheaper, and secondly, like getting them delivered faster to the customer.
Right.
So that's it. And and transitioning from technology into product management was definitely a very difficult job in terms of the first time you transition out of that role and you start working with the technology team. तो आप बहुत सारी चीजें ऐसे सोचते हो कि अच्छा ये वाली चीज इस वाली चीज में ये वाला लॉजिक लगेगा, ये चीज ऐसे हो जाएगी, ये चीज ऐसे हो जाएगी, and you think as a technology guy rather than as a business guy at that point of time, or basically as a customer. So that is a big transition that you have to learn through. The second one is basically like you need to figure out that you don't need to step into the shoes of every other guy in the team. You may be a rock star in terms of technology. You may be a rock star UX guy. You may be a rock star business guy, and all of that. But you don't have to step into the shoes of anyone. You have to sit in between to make sure that everything is working fine. You have to be the leader to take decisions. You are not the one to implement them. All you can do is you can influence people, but nobody reports to you, so you have to influence the decision, but you can't drive the decision in a specific direction only.
Right.
And it took almost like 3 to 6 months of transition period. It was not a very smooth transition period. And you can't go. And सबसे ज्यादा इंटरेस्टिंग होता है जो लोग या तो यूएक्स से आते हैं या टेक से आते हैं, वो जाके अपने यूएक्स या टेक वाले बंदे को जाके बोलते हैं ये काम तो मैं 2 घंटे में कर दूंगा. So that doesn't mean you are like you are a rockstar developer and he's a shit developer. It is just that you need to understand that everybody is different, everybody is not like you, and they
Exactly.
have a different technology than what you have, and you may be actually wrong at some times.
Absolutely. Viplav has a question, and I have a follow-up question to what you just said. Can we see a PRD document? Will it be possible for you, Jay? Any PRD or
That
any?
might be difficult because all the information is basically PV to the company, so I can't really
Sure,
show
sure.
something. But what I can probably do is like let me try to find something. So when I was applying at Careem or basically interviewing, I had written down some documents. So I can keep answering the questions and I'll find something like on my email.
Sure. So I think it will be great if you can share a couple of anecdotes on how did you prepare for interviews. And you said right, the 6 months were very tough. So during the job also it would be tough, right? The first 30 days, first 60 days are very difficult for any product manager. But before that, transitioning into product management, preparing for the interviews, coming from a technology background, yes, I can understand that it would have been easy for you to answer the technical questions, but but then there are business questions, then there are design questions, right? How did you prepare for them?
So in terms of like while preparing for the product management interviews, so I picked up 2 books that were pretty much a holy grail for me.
Okay.
One of them was one of the books from Google, which is basically like how to crack the PM interview, and I would recommend everyone to read that book. It's pretty good.
Right.
And the second one was Decode and Conquer.
Right.
So both of them actually give into a good insight into how to crack the PM interview, what kind of questions to accept, and the third was like since I was doing my MBA and part of the MBA was about doing a lot of case studies. You basically understand the market scenario, dynamics, user profiles, and everything. You break them down into different problem structures and trees and everything. So from that perspective, like the business aspect was definitely a bit covered from that one, and we used to do a lot of mock interviews between ourselves, etc., between ourselves as a group, and these were the 2 books that was super helpful in that one. So and do a lot of interviews among yourself as well, and this is like a so product management interviews are not like the hardcore tech interviews or UX interviews where you say like okay, write this code or write this piece of code or
Right.
design piece of UX or something. It's about like you pick. So it's basically a vast space. You pick up a problem statement. You define the problem statement. This is my problem statement. This is how I'm going to measure whether it's a success or a failure, and this is how I'm going to implement a solution around it.
Right.
Most of the interviews are about not getting the you don't have to get the right answer at the end of the interview. It's about how you solve that problem, how you go about solving that problem.
Correct. So that way, I think it comes very close to consulting interviews. At
Yes,
least some of the aspects are very similar, very close to consulting interviews, where you are tested for your process, your logical thinking, and how you are able to connect dots.
that's pretty much it. You have to understand the problem. You have to break down the problem, and then you can find solutions around it. And it's all about like how you go about solving the problem, asking the right question.
Correct. Awesome. Any questions about metrics, about driver app? What is the riskiest thing, or what's the most difficult product that they built? Anyone?
I'm actually working on a very cool product these days,
Mm-hmm.
and
Why don't you
I'm
share
actually
about that?
working on a very cool product. It's gonna go live in a couple of weeks' time. Maybe had this one been like after 2 weeks, I would have flashed that product.
We would invite you again. What is it about?
So we are modifying like the driver app into a complete new app, and there is a section that I was working on basically in terms of transparency,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how our drivers view their earnings.
Acha. Interesting.
Uh, it's earnings is those topics which basically gets everyone excited. Everyone has 1,000 different ideas about that topic, but when you actually go about solving that problem, it's very different.
Agreed. Okay, there's one more question from Prashant, and I think I would say this will be the last two questions. So, two questions I last two questions to ask. So, what are the various ways tools you use to track the engagement metrics? And the second question is, building for local folks has always been a problem. I don't know whether cab drivers are comfortable with tech interfaces and comfortable with English, or Careem uses native language. So one is about how do you measure, how do you track engagement metrics, what do you do exactly tactically. The second is more to do with how do you design, considering the drivers might not be comfortable with English. So how do you incorporate native language, or uh, how do you use uh,
I'll
language in
probably
your
do.
interfaces?
I'll take the second question first and then
Sure.
come back to the first question. So in terms of like building the local, like in terms of the, the cab drivers or basically the captains as we say them, are comfortable with tech interface. It's basically like if you put the device. So most of the people have smartphones in the region. They understand how things work and everything. And our products are completely like very super local. Like they're designed for the local markets. We go out and interact, and we interact with all the markets. So like we operate from Morocco to Pakistan across all geographies. And once we're developing a product, we do user testing, we user interviews across all these markets. And so that's why our products are very super local and they're designed from that perspective. So that was it's not a problem. And the second one is basically
Sorry,
like
do you also, so is it when you say it's local, or it's native, do you mean, so is it the entire language in the entire text, everything is
everything
completely written from it's a native first, it is thought native first, or is it like translated from English to the native
they
language?
need. So basically, the entire flow and everything is basically designed in English. But then when it's tested with the users, it's actually translated. The prototypes are translated and tested with the users.
Got it. And do you also use a lot of symbols and stuff to in place of actual words, so
Well,
that
that depends on like what's the like what specific project that we're working on. We
okay,
generally try to use as much amount of representation as possible because imagine you are a driver and you're driving the car. अगर आपको 10 चीजें पढ़नी पड़ेंगी, it becomes like an impossible task for you.
sure, got it,
So
makes sense.
Uh, so there was this question around the fact that where it mentioned like what are the various tools and way you use to track the engagement metrics. It basically depends on what kind of metric
Really?
that you're tracking. If you're tracking like the number of rides by a particular user or something, that you can track by your internal database, and we have like Redash and all those tools available where you can create all the dashboards on the fly, and you can track all of the experiments over there. And but there is something specific that you're trying to track on the app itself, where you say like if these set of users are exposed to this particular feature and whether they click this button or not, then we use Mixpanel or something similar kind of tools coupled with Google
So
Analytics.
that
Redash is basically an internal tool. It's basically a
it,
hive source of data. and it's a fairly straightforward tool where you can create all the dashboards on the fly. And then there was a second question, like what I have experienced here in India is having a smartphone doesn't mean like cab drivers is friendly with tech interfaces. So it's basically like this, like if they're not, so they're everybody is familiar with the technology, they understand. I mean, everybody is familiar with technology. It's just that like if you're not solving their specific problem, it will become non-intuitive to them, and then they'll not be able to use that specific product. So that's why we do the user test. That's why we do a lot of user testing with actual prototypes with the users, and that's what the Google Design Sprint is about. Like you basically start with the idea, start with the end goal that you want to solve. What is the end user that you want to solve? In the next 5 days, you brainstorm, you come up with a prototype, you design a survey around it, you actually give that working prototype to the users. And if the users could be across the region or any part of the world, and then you ask them the specific set of questions. If they're able to pick up those clues, pick up that prototype, and able to navigate in that particular app in the specific fashion that you would want, then you have actually solved their problem. So it's I don't say it's a problem of the it's a tech interfaces. It's about like applying to solve the problem that the users are actually facing. So the feature that I was speaking about is going to come out in 2 weeks. We did user testing on this specific feature in like for 3 to 6 weeks, like where we had like prototypes designed for like every market, like we designed and tested it with every market, so in order to get it down so that everybody understands it. So how do you measure the success of any feature you ship at Careem? Yes, there are definitely metrics around it, and you basically like have a bit of understanding, like okay, if this is the problem that I'm trying to solve for, this is the current size of the problem. You would basically take a guess around. You say like, okay, these are the specific issues that I'm solving, and then you measure around that. So there is no one answer to that one. Like every feature should have a drop of X percentage or increase the conversion by Y percentage. So there is no one specific answer to that. You have to figure it out when you're solving that specific problem.
Guys, I think the questions can keep going on. I think Jai is very kind to also be available for us to answer any questions that you might have in future. Uh,
Yeah.
right? And I would suggest, although to all of you that uh, ask very precise, very specific questions. Okay, so that I think that will help you as well as Jai to answer even more in a much better way, right? Something which is going to help you very tactically a lot. For example, how you measure the success of any features you ship at Careem, it's very difficult to exactly. It's a very broad question, right? Success of any features, it's बहुत difficult है इसको answer करना. But if you could possibly ask that how early do you how early how important is it to have a measurement plan when you are setting up the user stories itself, and how do you uh,
That's the first thing that we do.
precisely, right? So वो
That's
कब
the first.
करते हो, and do you get buy-in of every developer designer before you even pitch, or even if you commit, for instance,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
right?
basically, like this is the another learning. Thanks for highlighting, Talvinder. कि आप बेसिकली खुद से कभी कोई टाइमलाइन नहीं कमिट करो जाके.
Right.
अपने आपको लगता है कि वो टाइमलाइन हो सकती है, उसके हिसाब से टाइमलाइन नहीं होगी. यू नीड टू डिस्कस विद ऑल द स्टेक होल्डर्स इन्वॉल्वड एंड देन गेट टाइमलाइंस. यू हैव टू गेट बाय इन ऑफ ऑल द स्टेक होल्डर्स एंड देन यू एक्चुअली प्रोसीड विद समथिंग. एंड लाइक दिस इज द होली गाइड. लाइक आप प्रॉब्लम क्या सॉल्व कर रहे हो, आप उसको मेजर कैसे करोगे, ये सब ये आपको पहले से ही डिटरमिन करना पड़ेगा. उसके बाद आप एक्चुअली कोई भी फीचर लिखना शुरू करोगे, कोई फीचर सोचना शुरू करोगे.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
So
also think in terms of the value of that particular feature. Like आप imagine करो कि जैसे अभी what we also do over here is like our job is not over until the feature is like shipped
live,
out.
shipped out
Our
and
job is
measured.
measured, and also about फिर उसके बाद एक step और आगे जाते हैं till we fill that role as well over here is like we actually do like PR videos around it. where we actually explain the feature as if like कि अगर हम मार्केट में जाके अगर इस वाली चीज को लॉन्च करेंगे या कोई न्यूज की स्टोरी अगर बनेगी, मार्केटिंग की स्टोरी बनेगी, तो व्हाट वुड इट हाईलाइट? सो वी
Exactly.
थिंक टू दैट लेवल, एंड उस वो चीज अचीव करने के बाद देन वी ट्रैक बैक एंड देन वी ट्राई टू सॉल्व दैट प्रॉब्लम.
Absolutely. Jay, I think यहाँ पे ना so there is the tutor who is taking care of the course, which I think I told you about her. So
Yeah, yeah.
she's from Amazon, right? And Amazon,
Yep.
you know pretty well, right? They follow the PR strategy, right? So they start everything as if everything is done, and they're writing a press release for that particular product.
Exactly.
That's where the entire discussion starts, right? And it's fantastic that you spoke about precisely the same thing. So guys, I hope all of you are, now that you have spoken to at least 4 or 5 experts, you're about to see some pattern, right? That effectively the elements are the same, the dots are essentially the same, and it's just a uh, they have been arranged differently for different companies, right? Amazon would put PR first. Careem would say that okay, we can do it later, right? And so on and so forth. Like the dots actually are the same. The lines which are connecting each one of them are different, but almost सबका आंसर लगभग सेम आने लग गए होंगे now. By now you would have got that sense, I hope, right? So at that note, guys, I would not take any more time of Jai. Um he is there on LinkedIn, and I'll also pass on any questions that you guys might have to him on a later time. Uh, thank you so much, Jai. It'd be great if you
Thank
can show up your face once again. Yeah.
uh,
Thank you so much for showing up 8:30 on a Friday, like the worst time possible. Uh,
yeah, for
thank
me
you.
that's the weekend.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was very insightful. I think there was whole a lot of things that we learned. Uh,
Yeah.
so, guys, uh, that's it for now.